Dim the lights low, lower still. Let the everyday recede and allow the silence to deepen around you. Welcome back, connoisseurs of the uncanny, to the Somber Scroll. Tonight, we venture into places built for reverence, for sanctuary, for the elevation of the spirit. But time is indifferent to purpose, and neglect breeds its own kind of blight. We speak of churches, chapels, cathedrals, stone and timber testaments to faith, now surrendered to decay, reclaimed by nature and steeped in an unnerving silence that feels far from holy. We delve into the world of forbidden churches, exploring the abandoned and forgotten. There's a unique weight to an abandoned house of worship. It's more than just crumbling plaster and rotting wood. It's the ghost of devotion, the echo of countless prayers offered up into silence, the lingering scent of incense mingling with mold. It's the unsettling feeling that the sacred, when abandoned, doesn't simply fade away. Sometimes it curdles. Sometimes the silence isn't empty. It's listening. And sometimes the reasons a place becomes forbidden are far darker than mere structural decay. Our chronicle tonight centers on such a place, a name whispered with unease by the few locals who live in the sparsely populated valley miles away. St. Jude's Abendrot Chapel. An odd name, Abendrot, German for sunset glow or twilight. A name that feels both poetic and ominous, particularly given the chapel's reputation. It wasn't merely abandoned, it was sealed, officially condemned due to unstable foundations and its remote location making upkeep impossible. But the stories told in hushed tones spoke of more. Of Father Alistair Thorne, the last priest to serve there in the late 1950s, a man charismatic and brilliant, but whose interpretations of Scripture grew increasingly unconventional. Of a congregation that became fiercely loyal, isolating themselves from the outside world. Of strange lights seen flickering in the chapel windows long after services should have ended. And then, the abrupt end. No fire, no specific disaster reported, just cessation. The congregation vanished, Father Thorne disappeared, and the diocese swiftly deconsecrated the chapel, barring its doors, forbidding entry, and letting the mountain reclaim it. Naturally, such a place became a siren call to those who chase the echoes of the past and the whispers of the unknown. Enter the team behind the moderately popular web series, Threshold Anomalies. Not ghost hunters in the sensationalist sense, but meticulous documentarians of forgotten spaces, with a focus on atmospheric documentation and historical context, though they weren't averse to capturing the unexplainable. There was Marcus, the pragmatic leader, cameraman and editor, grounded, skeptical but open-minded. His focus was on safety and objective recording. Beside him, Dr. Eleanor Vance, no relation to our previous tale's host, rest assured, Ellie for short, the historian and researcher. It was Ellie who had unearthed the fragmented history of St. Jude's and Father Thorne, piecing together obscure diocesan records and local folklore. Then came Ben, the tech specialist, laden with EMF meters, audio recorders, thermal imagers, always searching for quantifiable data, the hard evidence that might validate the legends, though he often found only faulty wiring and drafts. Finally, there was Chloe, the newest member, brought on as a second camera operator and field journalist, tasked with capturing the human element, the reactions, the atmosphere, her own beliefs still forming, acting as the audience's proxy. St. Jude's was their white whale, remote, steeped in dark legend, officially forbidden, the perfect blend for their series. Ellie was particularly driven, fascinated by the theological schism Father Thorne seemed to represent and the mystery of his vanished flock. Ben hoped the remote location, far from signal interference, might yield cleaner data. Marcus just wanted compelling footage and a safe exploration. Chloe, she was just trying to keep up, excited and apprehensive in equal measure. The journey itself was an exercise in isolation. Paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a barely discernible dirt track winding steeply up the thickly forested mountainside. The air grew cooler, thinner. The silence, broken only by the van's engine and the cry of unseen birds, felt ancient, watchful. They passed crumbling stone walls, remnants of long-forgotten farms, nature relentlessly erasing human presence. Finally, they reached a small, overgrown clearing, and there it stood, St. Jude's Abendrot Chapel. It wasn't large, but it was imposing. Built from dark local stone, it seemed less designed and more extruded from the mountainside itself. Its architecture was unsettlingly asymmetrical, a strange mix of traditional Gothic elements and something harsher, almost brutalist. The steeple was squat, thick, ending not in a cross, but in a strange, multi-pronged spire that looked vaguely menacing against the bruised afternoon sky. Gargoyles leered from the eaves, but they weren't the usual medieval grotesques. These were distorted, anguished faces, mouths open in silent screams. The stained glass windows were mostly boarded up from the inside, but fragments still visible depicted not serene biblical scenes, but unsettling, almost abstract images in deep, bruised colors, purples, crimsons, blacks. A low, crumbling stone wall encircled the chapel grounds, choked with weeds and thorny bushes. Inside, weathered headstones tilted at drunken angles in the overgrown graveyard. Names long eroded by wind and rain. A rusted iron gate bearing a faded, bullet-riddled, condemned, "No trespassing" sign issued by the county hung open, beckoning and warning simultaneously. Well, Marcus breathed, panning his camera across the scene. It's certainly atmospheric. Atmospheric doesn't cover it, Ellie murmured, already consulting her notes. Built 1888. Father Thorne arrived 1952. Chapel deconsecrated and sealed 1959. The speed of that is unusual. Ben was already out with his meters. Baseline EMF is nominal, maybe slightly elevated near the north wall. Temperature is dropping fast as the sun dips, though. Chloe filmed the unsettling gargoyles. Whoever carved these was not having a good day. They approached the main entrance. Heavy oak doors, weathered gray, bound shut with thick, rusted chains and multiple padlocks. Clearly, someone had been serious about keeping people out. Or perhaps, keeping something in. Okay, Plan B, Marcus said, consulting a rough schematic Ellie had found. There were reports of a partially collapsed wall near the old vestry, around the back. Let's check it out. Stay alert. They skirted the chapel, pushing through tangled undergrowth. The air felt heavy, still. The silence was profound, broken only by their own footsteps and the occasional snap of a twig. Around the back, shaded by ancient brooding pines, they found it. A section of the stone wall near the foundation had indeed crumbled inwards, creating a dark, jagged opening just large enough for a person to squeeze through. The air wafting from the opening was cold, unnaturally so, and carried a bizarre smell. Damp earth, crumbling plaster, rodent droppings, yes, but overlaid with the faint, sweet, cloying scent of old incense, and something else, something metallic, like dried blood. Right, Marcus said, adjusting his headlamp. Ben, you're first. Check for stability, air quality if your meter still works. Ben cautiously peered inside, shining his light. Looks relatively stable right inside. Air seems okay, just stale. Smells weird though, like my grandma's attic mixed with a slaughterhouse. He squeezed through the opening. Clear. One by one, they followed, emerging from the tight squeeze into the musty darkness of what seemed to be a small sacristy or vestry. Ruined vestments lay decaying in heaps on the floor. A simple wooden table stood coated in dust, upon which sat a single overturned pewter chalice. Dust motes swam thick in their flashlight beams. The silence inside the chapel was different. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It felt deliberate, oppressive, like a held breath. They pushed through a heavy wooden door into the main body of the chapel. The scale, though not vast, was imposing due to the high, vaulted ceiling, lost in shadow above their beams. Pews, coated in decades of dust, stood in silent rows, facing a simple stone altar at the far end. Above the altar, where a crucifix might normally hang, was a large, dark, abstract symbol carved directly into the stone. A complex knotwork design that felt vaguely serpentine, deeply unsettling. The boarded-up stained glass windows let in only slivers of the fading twilight, painting distorted, colorful patterns on the dusty floor and decaying walls. The air was freezing cold, far colder than seemed natural. Incredible, Ellie whispered. her historian's awe momentarily overriding her unease. The altar carving. That's not standard iconography. It almost looks like a variant of a Celtic knot, but corrupted. Ben swept the nave with his EMF meter. Still fairly low readings, but fluctuating slightly near the altar. Thermal shows extreme cold spots, way below ambient, especially around that carving. Chloe filmed the eerie light patterns from the windows. Feels like we stepped into another century or another reality. Their exploration began. They moved slowly, respectfully, documenting the decay. They found hymnals fused together by damp, their pages filled with standard hymns. But occasionally, Ellie pointed out handwritten annotations in the margins, strange symbols, verses subtly altered, names crossed out. They approached the altar cautiously. The stone felt unnaturally cold to the touch. The carved symbol seemed to pulse faintly in the periphery of their vision. Ben placed an audio recorder on the altar steps. "Anything?" Marcus asked. "Just background noise for now," Ben replied, adjusting levels. "But let's leave it running." They investigated the dusty pipe organ tucked into an alcove. Its keys were yellowed, some missing. Several large pipes had collapsed inwards. As they stood there, a single, low, discordant note suddenly resonated from the organ, wheezing through the silent chapel before dying away. They all jumped, beams snapping towards the instrument. "Okay," Ben breathed. "Air pressure, dust settling." "Sounded pretty deliberate to me," Chloe countered, her voice tight. Ellie examined the keyboard. "No keys are depressed. And look," she pointed. A thick layer of undisturbed dust covered the keys, except for one key, the one corresponding to the low note they'd heard, which had a single, clear, fingertip-sized mark in the center, as if someone had just pressed it. A chill, unrelated to the ambient cold, traced its way down Marcus's spine. "All right, let's keep moving. Check out the confessional booth." The dark wood confessional stood near the side entrance, looking particularly gloomy. Marcus hesitated, then pulled open one of the heavy doors. Inside, it was pitch black, cramped, and smelled strongly of dust and old wood. He shone his light inside the priest's compartment. Empty. He then checked the penitent's side. Also empty, save for a thick layer of dust on the kneeler. As he was about to close the door, a faint whisper seemed to brush against his ear, seeming to come from inside the booth. A sibilant, unintelligible sound. He slammed the door shut, heart pounding. "Did you guys hear that?" They shook their heads. "Hear what?" Ben asked. "A whisper, right by my ear, inside the booth." Ben scanned it with the EMF meter. Nothing. "Probably just acoustics, man. Sound bouncing weirdly." Marcus wasn't convinced. The feeling of being watched, previously vague, was now intensifying, focusing. It felt personal. Ellie, meanwhile, had noticed small, alcove-like niches carved into the walls at intervals, obscured by shadows. Shining her light into one, she recoiled slightly. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried, unrecognizable herbs, was a small, crudely made doll fashioned from sticks and twine, with what looked disturbingly like human hair tied around its head. She checked another niche, a similar doll. Another held dried animal bones arranged in a spiral pattern. "Marcus," she called softly, "look at this." They examined the niches. These weren't Christian relics. They felt older, more primal. Folk magic, or something darker, integrated into Father Thorne's unconventional practices. "This feels less like a church, and more like—" Ellie trailed off, searching for the word. "A container." The decision was made to investigate the bell tower, accessed via a narrow, winding stone staircase near the entrance. Marcus took point, wary of the structural integrity. The stairs were coated in thick dust and debris, clearly unused for decades. The climb was claustrophobic, the air thick and stagnant. They emerged onto a small, wind-swept platform high above the chapel floor. 4 arched openings looked out over the darkening valley and the dense forest surrounding the chapel. In the center hung a single, large bronze bell, green with verdigris. A thick, frayed rope dangled from its mechanism. The view was spectacular, but unsettling. The isolation felt absolute. The wind howled mournfully through the arches. "Careful near the edges," Marcus warned, filming the bell. "Looks stable, but let's not test it." Ben took readings. "EMF is jumping wildly up here, and the temperature freezing." As he spoke, the heavy bronze bell above them emitted a low, resonant dung. Not a full toll, but a single clear note that vibrated through the stone beneath their feet. Impossibly loud in the confined space. They ducked instinctively, staring up at the bell. It hung perfectly still. The rope hadn't moved. "What the hell?" Chloe yelled over the wind. "Did lightning strike? A bird?" "No storm," Marcus said grimly, scanning the sky. "And no bird could make it ring like that." A sudden, powerful gust of wind slammed through the tower, staggering them. For a terrifying moment, Chloe felt an invisible force push hard against her back, shoving her towards the open archway overlooking the sheer drop. She cried out, stumbling, only saved by Ben grabbing her arm at the last second. "Something pushed me," she gasped, terrified. "It was the wind," Ben insisted, though his face was pale. "Just a strong gust." "Enough," Marcus declared. "We're done up here. Let's go, now." They scrambled back down the narrow stairs, relief washing over them as they reached the relative safety of the main chapel floor. But the atmosphere had shifted again. The silence felt charged, hostile. The shadows seemed deeper, darker, congregating in the corners. "Okay," Marcus said, trying to regain control. "We document the altar area more closely. Maybe check for that crypt Ellie mentioned in the records, and then we get out. Agreed?" They nodded, subdued. As they approached the altar again, the audio recorder Ben had left there emitted a loud burst of static. Then went completely silent, its indicator lights dead. Another one bites the dust, Ben muttered, frustration warring with fear. Something here is draining batteries or actively interfering. Ellie was examining the floor around the altar. Look, she pointed to faint lines in the stone, almost invisible under the dust. It looks like a trapdoor. Together, they managed to heave aside a heavy flagstone near the altar steps, revealing a dark opening and a set of narrow, steep stone steps leading down into blackness. The smell that wafted up was overpowering. Damp earth, profound decay, and that cloying incense mixed with the unmistakable odor of old death. This was it, the crypt, or whatever lay beneath. Flashlights ready, Marcus said, his voice low. Single file. I lead, Ben behind me, Ellie, then Chloe watching our six. Keep comms open, even if they're just static. Announce if you see or hear anything, and nobody touches anything. He descended into the oppressive darkness, his beam cutting a swath through air thick with dust and history. The steps were slick with damp. The crypt opened into a low-ceiling chamber, surprisingly large. Stone archways supported the roof, and along the walls were niches, burial vaults, sealed with stone slabs. Some slabs were intact, bearing names and dates from the 19th and early 20th centuries. Others were cracked, broken, or missing entirely, revealing dark, empty voids within. In the center of the crypt stood a rough-hewn stone sarcophagus, clearly much older than the chapel itself, its lid slightly askew. Strange symbols, similar to the one above the altar, but even more complex and disturbing, were carved into its surface. Pre-Christian? Ellie whispered, awestruck and horrified. What is this doing here? Ben swept the crypt with his thermal camera. Cold, unbelievably cold around that sarcophagus. And wait! He froze, aiming the thermal camera at a dark corner behind the sarcophagus. I've got a heat signature. Small. Animal? Marcus swung his light towards the corner. Nothing there but shadows and rubble. You sure? Yeah, it was... Hang on, it's gone now. Ben lowered the camera, frowning. Maybe a rat. Chloe suddenly gasped, pointing her camera towards one of the broken burial niches along the wall. Did you see that? In there? See what? Marcus asked, swinging his beam. Eyes, Chloe insisted, her voice trembling. Just for a second. Two small, red points of light, way back in the darkness. They stared into the empty blackness of the vault. Nothing. Okay, nerves are frayed, Marcus said, trying to stay calm. Let's just document the sarcophagus and get out. They cautiously approached the central sarcophagus. The air around it was arctic. Ellie shone her light on the carvings. These symbols, they're not just decorative. They look like wards, binding runes, designed to keep something in. As she spoke, the heavy stone lid of the sarcophagus shifted with a low, grinding groan, sliding further open by a few inches. They scrambled back, weapons lights trained on the widening gap. Complete darkness lay within. No bones, no remains visible, just impenetrable blackness. Then, from within that blackness, came a voice, a dry, rattling whisper that seemed to echo not just in the crypt, but inside their skulls. Libera nos, free us, followed by a chorus of weaker, overlapping whispers, pleading, tormented. E malo, from evil, qui venit, who comes, in nomine, in the name. The whispers dissolved into a cacophony of faint, sorrowful moaning. Father Thorne? Ellie breathed, recognizing the fragmented Latin phrases, twisted versions of prayers. The temperature plunged further. Ice crystals formed on the stone walls. Their breath plumed like smoke. All their flashlights flickered violently, threatening to plunge them into total darkness. "Get out!" Marcus roared, grabbing Ellie's arm. "Everyone out, now!" They turned to flee back towards the stairs, but the way was blocked. Standing at the base of the steps, silhouetted against the faint light from the chapel above, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, clad in decaying black vestments. Its face was obscured by shadow, but the malevolent pressure radiating from it was immense. It raised a skeletal hand, pointing towards the sarcophagus. The moaning intensified. A low, guttural growl joined the whispers, seeming to emanate from the sarcophagus itself. The ground beneath their feet vibrated slightly. Ben, reacting instinctively, raised his thermal camera. It's not showing up. The figure isn't there on thermal, just cold. The figure took a step towards them, silent, gliding. Chloe screamed and threw the heavy metal flashlight she was carrying. It flew through the space where the figure stood, hitting the stone steps behind it with a loud clang. The figure didn't flinch, didn't react. It wasn't entirely physical. Panic seized them. They were trapped between the apparition and whatever was stirring in the sarcophagus. Suddenly, Marcus remembered the niches, the strange dolls. He lunged towards the nearest intact burial vault, praying the slab wasn't sealed tight. He threw his weight against it. It didn't budge. He tried another. Stuck fast. Ellie screamed, pointing back towards the sarcophagus. A thin, black, smoke-like tendril snaked out from the gap in the lid, questing blindly in the air like a searching vine. In desperation, Marcus shone his main beam directly into the shadowy face of the priestly figure blocking the stairs. "Father Thorne, leave us alone!" The figure recoiled slightly from the light, and for a fraction of a second, the shadows shifted. They saw a glimpse of the face beneath, desiccated skin stretched tight over a skull, empty sockets burning with cold, intelligent malice, a lipless mouth pulled back in a soundless snarl. It was Thorne, or what remained of him. At momentary recoil was all they needed. "Now!" Marcus bellowed. He shoved past the figure, passing through a wave of nauseating cold and the smell of grave dirt, and scrambled up the stairs. Ben and Chloe were right behind him, Ellie stumbling after them, sobbing. They burst out into the main chapel, slamming the heavy flagstone back into place over the crypt entrance, the grinding sound echoing sickeningly. They didn't stop. They ran through the nave, past the accusing altar, past the silent organ, through the vestry, and scrambled out through the opening in the wall, back into the blessed, natural twilight. They collapsed near the van, gasping for air, hearts pounding, covered in dust and grime. The forest around them seemed peaceful now, welcoming, compared to the suffocating malevolence within the chapel walls. Their equipment was a mess. Batteries drained, recordings corrupted or filled with inexplicable static and whispers. Thermal readings showing impossible cold spots. The only clear evidence was the single organ note, the bell toll, and the frantic, terrified footage of their escape from the crypt, culminating in Chloe throwing her flashlight at something unseen by the camera. They drove away from St. Jude's Abendrot chapel as fast as the treacherous track would allow, casting fearful glances back at the dark stone structure, silhouetted against the dying sunset glow. It seemed to watch them go, silent, patient, guarding its secrets and its prisoners. The Threshold Anomalies episode on St. Jude's was fragmented, inconclusive, yet deeply unsettling. It generated debate, but little belief outside their core audience. For the team, however, the experience was transformative, terrifyingly real. Ellie abandoned her research into Father Thorne, convinced some knowledge was too dangerous. Ben became reluctant to use EMF meters, haunted by the memory of the figure that registered only as cold. Chloe suffered from claustrophobia and nyctophobia for months. Marcus, forever changed, steered the channel away from places with such dark histories, focusing instead on simple decay. St. Jude's Abendrot Chapel still stands, forbidden, forgotten, slowly being swallowed by the mountain. Locals still avoid the area. They say the wind carries whispers down from the peaks on stormy nights. They say the strange lights are sometimes still seen. They say Father Thorne never left, eternally bound to the cursed ground he defiled, perhaps acting as jailer for whatever ancient thing resides within the sarcophagus, forever whispering, Libera nos amalo. Some places of worship fall silent. Others have their silence filled. Be wary of trespassing on holy ground, especially when it has been deemed forbidden. You never know what prayers have gone unanswered, what faith has festered into something else, or what waits patiently in the darkness beneath the altar, longing to be free.